three extremely likable characters. It was beautifully photographed.
At 85, Katherine Ross has nothing left to prove and nothing left to hide. When she was asked to look back on her years in Hollywood, no one expected her answer to drift toward desire. Not scandal, not affairs, but something far more intimate. The quiet pull of men who never touched her, yet stayed with her for decades. She didn't speak in graphic terms. She didn't name secrets meant to shock. Instead, she spoke about presence. About men whose voices, silences, and confidence created moments where acting slipped into something dangerously real. These were not casual crushes. They were encounters where chemistry lingered long after the cameras stopped rolling, where attraction lived in glances, timing, and unspoken understanding. Now, near the end of her life, Katherine Ross is finally naming them. 6 men. 6 different kinds of allure. And once you hear who they are and why they mattered, you begin to understand that some desires don't fade with age. They simply wait for the truth to be told. Number 1. Sam Elliott. The allure of quiet strength. When Katherine Ross speaks about Sam Elliott, her tone changes first, then her pace slows. She doesn't describe him as handsome in the obvious Hollywood sense. Instead, she talks about how he stood in a room, how his presence didn't demand attention, yet somehow controlled it. Sam Elliott was never loud. He didn't rush conversations. He didn't fill silence just to be heard. And that, Katherine admits, was exactly what made him dangerous. There was a steadiness to him that felt rare, even on a movie set built on ego and urgency. His voice, low, deliberate, wasn't just attractive, it was grounding. When he spoke, people listened. When he didn't, they leaned in. Katherine has said that working alongside him made her feel safe in a way that wasn't romanticized. Not protected, but respected. He didn't perform masculinity, he inhabited it. There was no need to prove anything. And in an industry where everyone was constantly trying to be seen, Sam Elliott's restraint felt intimate. She never suggests anything happened. She doesn't need to. The attraction lived in moments, shared pauses, exchanged glances, the sense that nothing had to be explained. Sometimes, she reflects, desire isn't about urgency, it's about trust, and Sam Elliott embodied a kind of masculine calm that made everything else fade into the background. Number 2. Harrison Ford. The danger of not caring. If Sam Elliott represented safety, Harrison Ford represented the opposite. Katherine Ross describes him as unpredictable, not chaotic, but unapologetically himself. Harrison Ford didn't try to be charming. He didn't soften his edges. He didn't perform interest. And somehow, that indifference became its own form of seduction. What drew her in wasn't his fame or his looks. It was the sense that he existed outside the rules everyone else followed. He didn't chase approval. He didn't shape himself to fit expectations. He walked into rooms like he didn't need them, and that made people need him. Katherine admits that being around him felt like standing near a live wire. Conversations could turn sharp. Humor came unexpectedly. You never quite knew what he was thinking. And that uncertainty created tension that lingered long after interactions ended. There was something intoxicating about a man who didn't try to impress her, who seemed more interested in being honest than being liked. Harrison Ford's appeal lived in his refusal to play the game. He was restless, slightly distant, and impossible to predict. She doesn't describe longing for closeness. She describes curiosity, a pull toward someone who couldn't be fully read. With Harrison Ford, attraction wasn't comforting. It was unsettling. And sometimes, Katherine reflects, that's exactly what makes it unforgettable. Number 3. Dustin Hoffman. The seduction of vulnerability. Then there was Dustin Hoffman and everything shifted. Dustin didn't walk into rooms with confidence. He didn't command attention through silence or dominance. His power came from exposure, from letting people see what others hid. And for Katherine Ross, that honesty was profoundly disarming. During The Graduate, both were young, uncertain, and trying to prove themselves. Dustin didn't pretend to be polished. He brought nervous energy, emotional intensity, and a willingness to look awkward, sometimes painfully so. But that vulnerability created something rare: truth. Katherine has said that working with him felt less like acting and more like confessing. Emotions weren't shaped to be attractive. They were raw, immediate, impossible to fake. Dustin didn't protect himself behind charm or distance. He showed exactly who he was in the moment, flaws included. That openness blurred lines, not physically but emotionally. When someone allows you to see them without armor, it creates a form of intimacy that can be more powerful than touch. Katherine found herself responding not to confidence, but to courage, the courage to be exposed. Dustin Hoffman wasn't seductive in a traditional sense. He was compelling because he made honesty unavoidable. Being near him meant you couldn't hide either. And that kind of emotional nakedness, Katherine reflects, stays with you far longer than beauty or bravado ever could. Number 4. Robert Duvall. The pull of unfiltered truth. With Robert Duvall, Katherine Ross felt something she rarely experienced on set: exposure without protection. Duvall wasn't interested in charm. He didn't soften moments or smooth emotional edges. His approach to acting was blunt, almost confrontational, and deeply uncomfortable for anyone hoping to hide behind technique. When he worked, he demanded honesty, not performance. Katherine recalls that standing opposite him felt like stepping into a room where masks were not allowed. There was no space for vanity, no room for shortcuts. Every emotion had to be earned, felt, and carried fully into the scene. Duvall didn't seduce with looks or confidence. He seduced by making truth unavoidable. That intensity created a strange form of intimacy, not romantic, but visceral. Being around him meant surrendering control, allowing yourself to be seen without polish. Katherine admits that kind of closeness can be unsettling, even frightening, but it also leaves a mark. Duvall represented the kind of man who strips away illusion. He wasn't there to make you feel comfortable. He was there to make you real. And in an industry built on illusion, that authenticity carried a quiet, dangerous allure. Number 5. Paul Newman. Grace that never asked for attention. Paul Newman was different from all the rest. Katherine Ross doesn't describe him in fragments or moments. She describes him as a presence consistent, generous, and quietly commanding. His beauty was undeniable, but it was never the point. What stayed with her was how little he relied on it. Newman carried himself with an ease that suggested nothing needed to be proven. He listened more than he spoke. He made room for others. On set, he never used his status to dominate a scene. Instead, he elevated everyone around him. That restraint created trust. Katherine felt seen not as a star, not as a woman to be admired, but as a collaborator. There was intimacy in that respect, a sense that attraction could exist without possession or expectation. Paul Newman's allure lived in balance. He knew who he was, and he didn't need the world to confirm it. His kindness wasn't performative, his confidence wasn't loud, and in a profession filled with insecurity, that steadiness felt rare. Katherine reflects that some men are magnetic because they want something from you. Paul Newman was magnetic because he didn't. Being near him felt like standing beside a man at peace with himself, and that peace was profoundly seductive. Number 6. Robert Redford. The power of silence that never left. Robert Redford comes last, not by accident, but by memory. When Katherine Ross speaks about Redford, her words become sparse. She doesn't explain much, because she doesn't need to. Their connection was never loud. It never demanded definition. It existed in glances, timing, and long stretches of shared silence. Redford's allure was his restraint. He didn't overplay moments. He let them breathe. His stillness carried weight, and his silences invited imagination. Katherine admits that sometimes the strongest attraction comes from what's left unsaid. Working with Redford felt effortless, but not casual. There was awareness between them, an understanding that didn't require confirmation. He wasn't trying to pull her closer. He simply existed fully in the moment, and that presence lingered long after the scene ended. She never frames it as longing. She frames it as memory, the kind that doesn't fade, even when decades pass. With Redford, desire wasn't urgent or dramatic. It was quiet, sustained, and deeply personal. Katherine says there are connections you carry with you, not because anything happened, but because something could have. And sometimes, that unspoken possibility becomes more powerful than any action ever could. In the end, Katherine Ross wasn't confessing secrets. She was honoring moments. At 85, she understands something youth often misses, that desire is not always about what happens, but about what stirs. About the people who make time slow down, who awaken parts of us we didn't know were still alive. The 6 men she named were not conquests. They were reflections. Each represented a different chapter of her life, a different version of herself. What makes her honesty powerful is its restraint. She doesn't sensationalize the past. She gives it dignity. And in doing so, she reminds us that attraction doesn't disappear with age, it simply becomes more honest, more selective, and more meaningful. Perhaps that's why her story resonates so deeply. Now, we'd like to hear from you. Have you ever met someone who stayed with you not because of what happened, but because of what could have? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If you appreciate thoughtful Hollywood stories told with depth and respect, please like this video and subscribe to the channel. Because some memories aren't meant to fade. They're meant to be understood.